Hello, everyone, and happy Saturday. Welcome to your Kepler College community webinar. Today, we are learning about the role of astrology in dark times with Alejo Lopez. So apropos for this time in our history. I want to start by thanking Alejo his time and also thanking all attendees for your questions as well. Know that all proceeds from today's webinar and any free webinar go to Kepler College to help raise much needed scholarship funds. Remember that Kepler College stands out because it's a 501c3 charity and any donations from the United States are tax deductible. So sometimes you might get an issue with hearing, maybe the audio cuts out or something technical happens. If this occurs, here are a few steps you can take in order to shift the process. You can either check the audio settings and make sure you're on the right speaker. Sometimes the speaker is set up to say a different device than the one that you're on, like if it's connected to Bluetooth or something of that nature. Also make sure your volume is turned up. And at the end of the day, if all else fails, just come back in. That usually does the trick. If you haven't joined us for a webinar before, welcome, and we're happy to have you. Here are the ways you can ask questions. For this presentation, we'll be waiting on questions until the end. So feel free to type away in this little question box and we'll ask those at the end of the presentation. Here's a little tutorial on how to do that. It's very simple. Okay, here are some upcoming webinars and workshops. For now, we have on May 16th, Caro Tebbs and Batya Stark with How do Judaism, Christianity, and Islam Consider Astrology? This is going to be a fun one. And then on the 23rd, we get an introduction into Astro Gold for the Mac OS with Rhonda Buttery. This is going to be a great one if you have an interest in moving on to the Astro Gold for your Mac. And these are both free community webinars. So if you're looking to learn more and dive in a way that is affordable, we do offer these free to the public. And here are the last 3 of our spring classes. We've already filled up a great deal of our semester, but we have 3 that are still waiting to be filled. So that's the Psyche and Character, Forecasting for Clients, and Astrology and Sacred Paths in Western Edition. And please remember that you don't have to be on the degree path to take any of our courses. They're free, they're open to the public and free to take if you choose. So if you're just interested in diving in deeper in your astrological knowledge, we do have quite phenomenal educators with us. And here are some self-paced classes. These are classes you can take anytime, so there are no restrictions and you can really dive deeply into the content. This might be a really good option if you're, busy with kids while you're trying to navigate this whole pandemic life, or, you have school or work. It really helps you to take an independent approach and dive as deeply as you want into the content. Instructors will be available to answer questions, and you can really take your own approach. So here are a few of those classes, and each of them provide an in-depth approach to astrology and the topic. So now going into today's webinar, Astrology in Dark Times. Now, we all know that we're going through some difficult times right now, and we go through difficult moments, and this is the process of the ebb and flow of life, right? And it's important to understand how we can bring meaning and purpose to what's going on in the larger collective. We're constantly being told that we need to stay positive and approach these events with hope and trust, but at the same time, feelings of fear, despair, and anxiety arise. when we deny these feelings, it proves dangerous in the future, especially if we try to repress them and they go into the shadow and the unconscious collective, and it's just a mess. So in this talk, we're going to discuss the skills as astrologers that we have and our capacity to move between heaven and earth in order to bring a powerful message to light. And to do so, we will have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. What is the role of astrology? And the last, but certainly not least, to introduce your wonderful presenter, Alejo Lopez. He was born in Argentina, but moved to Europe at the age of 23. He holds a bachelor's degree in performing arts, great for teaching, another one in psychology, and is on the Faculty of Astrological Studies diploma, where he is a current tutor. He believes that once you learn astrology, you can never be alone, for the planets will always speak and guide you. He is one of the NORWAC, or NORWAC 2020 speakers, where he will lecture about astrological consultations, how to frame it, and how to make it effective. So we are excited to have him today, and he brings a wonderful addition to our community. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the presentation screen to him. Okay. Welcome, Alejo.
Well, hi. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me here. Do you have a white screen, or are you seeing the...
It is white.
Again?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, let me try it again. Now you can see it, right? No.
You see your face. Okay, now we see it. And then what did we, it's white again. So what did we do when it was able to go into the full screen?
I logged off and on.
Ah.
But well, I'm gonna try to start in the keynote. Sorry for this, I don't know why.
That's okay. Technical difficulties are part of the online educational experience sometimes.
Okay, so mostrar.
Okay, it's white again.
Should I go out and back?
Sure, if that is what worked last time, we can do that, and I will continue to talk to these lovely folks while we wait.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for your patience. As we all know, sometimes technical issues do arise, and all we can do is really work with them as we work with the, you know, seemingly dark times that we find ourselves in. And I think the most important thing about this webinar today is really that it can supply us with the tools we need in order to remain not just positive, but accept what's happening. And that life isn't always just rosy. So really understanding the ebb and flow, I think, is an important part of this. And Alejo is back. He is presenter. Let's see. Okay. So we see your screen, Alejo. Do you hear me?
I can hear you. Do you see?
Okay.
But you see it like in the small.
Yes.
Why?
Let's see. Let's try it. And okay, so what it's doing, it seems to be launching your Safari.
Yeah. Now you have it, right?
Yes. Great. Great
I
work.
don't know. I don't know how it's working,
Yay!
but now
You
it's
did it.
working.
Well, you did it. That's what matters.
Okay, well, thank you so
Okay,
much for having me here.
of
And
course.
I'm sorry for the technical thing. I'm not an expert on these things. Um, so, oh wait, something happened, right?
Let's
Okay, there
see.
it's
It went
okay.
back. There
Okay.
we go. We're back again.
So the idea, yeah, okay, the idea of this talk is to think about what's our role today. What is it that we do as astrologers? This is we're going through a very difficult time, and I think we have a message to give to the world. I mean, there's something we can do about what's going on right now. And in order to do this, will I will bring in some charts, some astrological charts, because of course, if we're doing astrology, I think it's important. And then I will also use some myths. So I think that as astrologers, we are walking between heaven and earth. We are kind of making a bridge between heaven and earth. And that is what's giving us a vision or a perspective on what's going on that can be meaningful to the world right now. So I'm going to bring some myths about these characters that are moving between two worlds to see if they may inspire us in what we could do. And then I'm also going to be talking a little bit about the philosophical tradition that is embedded in astrology. So sometimes, perhaps as modern astrologers, we just do astrology and we don't really pay much attention to what the philosophy that's supporting our practice. So I'm going to bring it in also to see what kind of philosophy we are maybe using unconsciously, and maybe there are some aspects of these different philosophical systems that we don't agree, so it will help us shape our approach to astrology and understand what our role could be. And I would like to say that I don't mean to be conclusive. I mean, this is not I'm not here saying what our role should be. I'm just bringing in my thoughts and my ideas and opening the question, what is the role of astrology, to start a conversation about it. Well, to continue actually a conversation, because this has been, a lot of people have been talking about this in the past. So to continue this conversation, because I think it's crucial for these times. But by no means I pretend to have the ultimate truth. And these are just my thoughts, and of course they could be challenged, and maybe if you have questions and something, if we have time at the end, there are some reflections that we can do together to see where this is leading us. So to start, I would like to start with a story, and this is a story that's in the Obsolescence of Oracles by Plutarch. And the story basically says that there were these sailors, and they heard a voice asking for one of them, for Tammuz. So the voice was asking, Tammuz, are you there? And the sailors were scared, so at first they didn't answer. But then in the end, Tammuz went out to the outer deck, and he asked, who is calling? And he didn't get an answer. He didn't. The voice did not introduce itself. It just said that the god Pan, the great god Pan, was dead, and that when they reached Palodis, they had to proclaim this death. And so the sailors didn't know what to do, because they didn't know where this voice was coming from. So they decided that when they reached Palodis, they would wait, and if there was no wind, they would proclaim this truth. And that's what happened. When they got there, there was no wind. So Tammuz went out, and he said, he shouted out, the great god Pan is dead. And according to Plutarch, there was a big lament coming from all over, a big cry coming from nature, because the great god Pan was dead. And I think this is a fundamental situation that we are dealing today, which is that the god Pan, which is the god of nature, is dead. And I mean, the gods should not die. Gods usually don't die. And this god, which is the god related to the power of nature, has passed away. A lot of scholars have related this with the idea of Christianity taking over, like becoming the most important myth in Western Europe. And so the idea that the great god Pan represents the old gods and the idea of multiple gods in the universe. And that's what was dying at the moment. Some other scholars have said that what it means is that Christianity or civilization, let's call it, came and forced us to repress our natural side, our instincts, and become more and more civilized, let's say. So the thing is that the great god Pan, it's not an easy god to deal with. Actually, he may have been manifested, making us have problems with the technological things. It's hard. I mean, when you prepare a presentation, it's true that one should consider which god are you calling up, are you summoning at the room. And we summoned today Pan, and it's not an easy god. He was accused of provoking panic, so that's why the word panic comes from. You were possessed by Pan. He was also he was also a musician, and he's usually represented playing music. And then you have in the folklore, in European folklore, you will later have the fairy rings, and they play music. And some people said that if a mortal human heard this music, he would be possessed and he would be dancing until exhaustion. So it's a very powerful force that's coming from nature. Then we also related with eroticism, the idea that we have an instinctual nature that has to do with pleasure and with enjoying our body. So this is a grounding god in the sense that it forces us, it doesn't force us, but it promotes the acceptance of our body needs. And I think that's also one of the ideas when we think that the great god Pan died, that we forgot about our body and we became more and more rationals. And then of course it's the god of nature. So I think one of the reason I'm bringing this myth, it's because I think that one of the problems we are dealing with today is that the great god Pan is dead, and we have been detached from nature and from our bodies and from our instincts and from the idea of pleasure, perhaps. Now, this is today's session, and there are many things that call my attention. And well, the ascendant is in Leo. And so if we look at the ruler of the ascendant, it's the sun, and it's usually we consider the ruler of the ascendant an important planet in a chart. And he's right at the midheaven because it's here it's 10 p.m. or something, but over there it's midday. And I think it's falling into the 10th house. And I think this is important because we are talking about the role of astrology in the social world. So this is what this chart is representing. I would claim that astrology is represented in this first house. This is the subject that's asking the question, and so the sun is in the 10th house, saying, okay, this is what we're talking about, the place astrology has to take in the social world. I'm also interested very much in the fact that Mars is right there on the descendant, and he's still in Aquarius. So it may be talking about a community, the will of the community to talk about this or to discuss these matters. And more importantly, Mars is ruling the 9th house. And we're going to talk a lot about the philosophy of astrology and the implications of astrology. So we're going to talk about meaning and purpose. So I think these are very 9th house themes. And the fact that it's in the 7th house and it's in Aquarius, to me, it's a sign that this is the time to open this discussion up to the community, to talk with others, to discuss it with others and see what we can build. And it's also ruling the 4th house. So again, I have this idea of family or community, like the family of astrologers, and perhaps also the idea of our past as astrologers, to bring back our past as astrologers. Where is astrology coming from? And finally, I would suggest that Neptune in the 8th is making me think again about the idea of what's the spiritual purpose of astrology, and it may be under a kind of transformation or death and rebirth. And well, these are just some thoughts that I got from this chart. I always, when I have to do a talk, I always look at the chart to see if what I'm proposing is in agreement with the time that the gods are hoping to support, you know. So the first thing I'm going to ask each of you, and you don't have to answer, of course, but this is just for you to think about, is where is your Jupiter? So in the introduction, you heard that I'm going to be giving a talk at Norwalk about how to run a consultation, and I'm going to be I'm going to focus a lot on the idea that everyone has your own chart, so there's no perfect consultation. It depends on your chart what a consultation should be. And even though we're talking here about a collective matter, what is the role of astrology in the world or in society, I believe that each one of us will have a different approach to that. And it might depend on many different factors in the chart, but I think one important factor will be Jupiter. So because Jupiter is talking about your sense of hope, your sense of where you find meaning in experience, how you find experience to be meaningful, and where you feel expanded, right? And it's kind of your image of God, if you will. So where's your Jupiter? And I'm going to be talking about a lot of stories and myths and about some philosophy that is behind astrology. So I would encourage everyone to look at your Jupiter and see if you resonate or not with these myths and with these different philosophical systems, to see what is the role that you as an astrologer believe. I would say, what is you as an astrologer, what do you believe the role of astrology should be? And we might not have all the same answer, because we might be bringing in different roles. I mean, we might be different types of astrologers and bringing in different functions that astrology can be doing right now in the world. So perhaps if you have a Jupiter in a fire signs, you're more willing to bring hope, actually, to believe that everything has a purpose, and we're going through this dark time but there's something that we can achieve if we just thrive and all of that. But maybe if you have Jupiter in an earth sign, you are more like, well, I need to find a practical way of applying all that I know to make astrology purposeful. I mean, to bring meaning to this moment. So it might depend on where your Jupiter is, what you believe the role of astrology is, and especially in these difficult times. So basically, what I think we need to ask ourselves 3 questions right now. What is astrology? And I think this is like a basic question that many of us have never asked ourselves. What do you believe astrology is? If you're an astrologer, what do you believe astrology is? What is it that we do? I mean, if we want to understand what is our role in society, we need to understand what is it that we're doing, and we need to understand it in a way that we can explain to other people, because not everybody understands what astrology is, and perhaps among ourselves we don't even agree what astrology is. So this is one of the questions I think we need to ask. The other question is, what is its purpose? What is it good for? I mean, in the end, if it doesn't have a purpose, why is it still here? It has been practiced for thousands of years, and probably it works for something. Probably it is bringing something. It is functioning to something. It is responding to some kind of need. But we need to ask ourselves, what is this purpose? What is it that we can do? And then finally, what is fate? I think this is kind of the basic question all astrologers eventually we meet at some point when we're studying astrology, and we might change, I mean, the answers to these questions. It might not be the same one through our whole life. It might be changing, but I think that what is fate, it's something that we eventually always face when we're studying astrology. So some people will believe that fate, you're given a fate when you're born, and that cannot be changed. So you're fated to have a certain life. Some people will believe that you don't. You can choose your fate. You can co-create reality with the universe. Some people will believe that you're fated, that your personality is fated, but then what's not fated is what you do with your personality. So it's like your chart may define maybe give you some abilities and some difficulties, but then you can choose what to do with them. So not everything is fated, and everyone will have a different belief. And I'm going to bring in stories and philosophical systems that may help you see what are your beliefs about this. And I think this is like the mandatory, this is like the basic question in astrology. What is fate? Because the struggle between fate and free will is something that I think has been the question about how to balance fate and free will. I think it's something that has been going on in astrology for a very long time. So to start with this, we need to go to the very root of astrology. And I like to believe that we need to go deep, 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 deep in the basic of astrology. And that's why I'm bringing a myth that has to do with going to the underworld. And I know most of you will probably know this myth. And this is the myth of Persephone and Demeter. So I'm bringing this myth because I'm looking for mythological figures that could move between different worlds, because this is what we do as astrologers. We move between heaven and earth. So the story is that, well, you all know the story. I don't know if all of you know it. So Demeter is the goddess, is the goddess of nature, and she was giving fertility to the earth. And she had her daughter Persephone, who was naive and young. And one afternoon, she was getting some flowers in the countryside, and she was kidnapped by her uncle, Hades or Pluto. And so Demeter became really, really sad. I mean, Demeter started looking for her all over, and she couldn't find it. So she became really, really sad, and the fields, they got dry, and so humankind could not eat anymore. So it was a disaster. So after a while, the gods asked Zeus, Jupiter, to do something, because this could not be anymore. I mean, they had to do something about it. But Demeter was super sad. So Demeter was, I mean, there are different versions of the myth. Sometimes she just forgot that the earth needed nurturing, and sometimes it's that she was mad because she was sad, so she didn't have the strength to do that. The thing is that Demeter, Pluto, Zeus, Jupiter, they're all siblings, you know. So in the end, Jupiter finds out that it's Pluto that has Persephone in the underworld. So I mean, and they're brothers. So Zeus will say, okay, so she has to come back. So Zeus will send Hermes to bring Persephone back. But the problem is that Persephone ate pomegranate in the underworld, and there's this law that if you eat something in the underworld, you cannot come back. You cannot come back to the world of the livings. So she was not allowed to come back. And I think, of course, this is kind of a metaphor about, I mean, if you've ever tried a pomegranate, when you cut it, it looks like it's bleeding. So of course, this means that Persephone lost her virginity with Pluto. And in a way, I would say Persephone, in a way, I think she wanted to be taken away from her mother. She wanted to be a woman on herself, by herself, and she wanted to be queen. I mean, in the end, she became the queen of the underworld, and she became very powerful. So what happened in the end was that it was decided that she would spend 6 months. I mean, it changes according to the legend, but let's say 6 months in the underworld and 6 months in the land of the living. And when she's outside, Demeter is happy. We have spring and summer, and when she's in the underworld, we have autumn and winter. And what I want to focus is not on Demeter. We usually focus on Demeter, and we talk about how nature is sad and all of that. But I want to focus on Persephone, because she is the one that could do the link between the underworld and the land of the living. She was given this right to move from one world to the other. And I think that may be something we do as astrologers. And I think we need to think about it if when we first started studying astrology, what was our first motivation to do so? Because, as I said before, Persephone enjoyed being the queen of the underworld. She enjoyed power. And I think we must acknowledge that at some point, probably most of us, I don't know if all of us, but most of us, we enjoyed when we learned astrology. This is giving us power to understand what's going on. So we must be aware of that. Of course, this myth is also linked with the idea of Hermes. And Hermes is like maybe the most archetypical myth that we have about bridging two different worlds, because he was allowed to go everywhere. He was the messenger of the gods. He was quick, he was cunning, he was smart, he was versatile, and he could move everywhere, and he would be sending messages everywhere. And he was, we have the image of Hermes the psychopomp, who would lead the souls in the underworld. And I think this is before we had Uranus, probably Hermes was one of the archetypal planets that would represent astrologers, because Hermes is the one that could bring messages from the gods. And that's kind of what we do. We look at the chart and we talk to the gods and we bring a message to our clients. And we also have to go deep into the chart, into our client's soul, perhaps, to be able to bring out some truth that they might not be willing to accept, or they may not be able to see. And it's a hard journey. And Hermes is a funny god in a way. I mean, he's a god that's always making jokes and that's having a laugh. And you think about it and you say, come on, this is the god that goes to the underworld and see all these nasty things. But then he comes up to the land of the living, and he goes up to the Olympus, and you see him cheerfully, you see him happy. So I think this is another archetype that we should bear in mind, how to move between worlds and how to bring this knowledge from one place to the other. And I think this is another story that may help us kind of grasp what our role might be. So for me, before we go on, I need to define what I think astrology is. And I love this definition by Patrick Curry. Astrology is the practice of relating the heavenly bodies to life and events on Earth, and the tradition that has thus been generated. So this means that it's not a science, it's not a religion, it's a practice. And that may question its truthness, how true astrology is. It's a practice, it's something humankind do, and we have been doing it for a long time. So it's the tradition that has thus been generated. We have inherited a tradition. It's something that has been going on for thousands of years. And I think it's a good idea to keep this in mind. And I'm like a great supporter of the idea that astrology is not a science. And I hope I'm not offending anyone who is in the audience that strongly believes that astrology is a science, because I really don't. And I don't think going that way will help us, because it's going to be really hard to prove that astrology is a science. And it's going to be really hard to follow the scientific method that we have today. And if we fail in proving it, I mean, I understand that because of the current situation, everything that's scientific tends to have more value. So I understand we want to give it more value. But if we fail at doing so, then we're going to lose value. And nobody will question the value that a Starry Night by Van Gogh has. It's a painting, and nobody will question that. If you are in New York in the museum and you see this painting in front of you, most of us will be moved by it. If you go to Madrid and you see, I don't know, the Guernica by Picasso, most of us will be moved by it. And it's not science, but it has an impact in us. And I think astrology will also have an impact in us, but it doesn't have to be a science. Now, how did we get to wanting astrology to be a science? So one of the philosophical, I mean, when I was saying before that we are inheriting a practice, most of us, I know not all of us, but most of us are using signs, are using houses, planets, and aspects. And I wouldn't say we're all Hellenistic astrologers, because most of us don't know all the Hellenistic techniques. So I wouldn't say that. But we are inheriting this Hellenistic model of astrology. And I think it's important to know the philosophical context where this had emerged, because many astrologers are practicing astrology and they don't know the philosophical support. They don't know where it's standing on. So that's why I'm bringing in Plato. And for the moment, the only idea I want to bring in is that, well, you know, Plato, he wrote a lot, and it has been said that everything that I was written after him, it's an answer to his writings. So it's like he's the fundamental philosopher. And basically what he says is that the world has a soul, and that we have a soul, and it's I mean, he says many other things, but that the soul is kind of locked up in this body. So we can improve, we can become better, and we need to kind of respect the needs of our soul to escalate and go through the planetary fields, to go back to God. So the idea of Plato is that we can become better of what we are, of what we think we are right now. We need to work on ourselves and to improve, let's say. And I think this is very much embedded in many astrological practices. And this will take me to another myth that I want to bring in, that I think it's also very related to us and to the idea of moving between worlds, and that is Tiresias or Tiresias. I'm not sure how you pronounce it in English. So Tiresias, he was a man, and he saw two snakes copulating. So I think he hit them with a stick or something like that. And Hera, she was mad about it because she got mad every once in a while, and he converted him into a woman. So for 7 years he lived as a woman. She had a husband. I think she had children even. And then after 7 years, she saw again the snakes, and he became a man again. So he's somebody who can walk between worlds because he's been walking between genders. You know what I mean? And then there was this discussion between Zeus and Hera about which one gets more pleasure in sex, the man or the woman. And Tiresias said that the woman gets 10 times more pleasure than men. So Hera was mad about it, and she made him blind. And Zeus could not stop Hera, but what he did was to give him the gift of foresight. So he's blind, but he can see the future. And I think this is very much related to our astrological, to us as astrologers, because we can see some things that other people cannot see. And perhaps our mission is to bring in this message to the world. And you know, in this painting, it's where he meets, he's already passed away, so he's in the underworld, and he meets Ulysses, and he gives them advices for the future. So this is the idea of Tiresias, that he was wise. He knew how both genders works, how both genders live their lives, and he could see the future even though he was blind. So this is another creature that moves between worlds, between blindness and foreseeing, and between women and men. The other philosophical idea that we have behind astrology is Aristotle, and he made it more rational. So Aristotle proposes that the cosmos is a mechanical device. So he proposes that the planets cause things on Earth. They are the cause of things. So if a planet moves, that's their fault. The fault of what's going on in the Earth, it's because this planet is here or this other planet is over there. And this may also be one approach in your astrological practice. You may be telling your clients, oh, this is happening to you because you have Mars here, or you have Saturn here, or Jupiter, or whatever. So I think it's important to bring in this other philosophical perspective. Now, this is the chart for the bubonic plague. So the King of France, he asked his astrologers, what was going on, why they had the plague, and they said that it was because there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So I don't know, I read some historical text, and it says, I got the timing and the place and the day from this text. And well, we see the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and I think that what's important here is that we're going to have a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius by the end of the year, and I'm not implying that this is going to become a bubonic plague, but I'm just bringing it in because this is what the astrologers said. It's because these planets are causing the plague. The planets are to blame. You know, the planets are to blame. They are causing this plague, and I'm not sure how supportive that was, and I'm not sure how much this brought meaning and understanding to what was going on. Of course, at the time, they didn't know they had Uranus and Pluto over there. And I think it's important because Uranus and Pluto were starting a new cycle there. So maybe something was changing at the moment. Something important was changing. Like on this year, we're starting many cycles. So maybe it's important when you have 2 or 3 cycles starting at the same time with heavy planets, maybe something important happens. And I'm not sure, what I'm going to say is I'm not sure if by accusing the planets of causing events on Earth, this will bring us understanding and purpose to this moment. Now, we have talked about the Greek myths, and I want to bring in some other myths, some more perhaps Western myths that we have grown up with. And so I'm going to bring in the Christian or the Jewish tradition. And you know, in paradise, there was the snake who she gave the apple to Eve, and that's how Eve got discernment. And we have been told that the snake is the devil, she's Satan, because she's temptation and all of that. But you know, before I started studying astrology, I studied Kabbalah, and in Kabbalah we have a different uh, vision of the snake, and the snake is the Messiah. It's not the devil; it's the Messiah, and he's giving us the apple of knowledge and discernment, so that we can live paradise, we can mature, grow up, and choose to go back to God. And I really like the idea of the snake joining heaven and earth. And you know that in some, like in yoga and some parts of Asia, they talk about the Kundalini snake kind of going up your your back, and again joining, helping you join heaven and earth. So the possibility of bringing discernment in this quest for bridging heaven and earth, I think it's important now, because of the nodes that are moving. You know, they're moving into Gemini and Sagittarius, and I think discernment has a lot to do with the axis of Gemini and Sagittarius. Sagittarius can become very, very dogmatic, and I think we are seeing it already. And then with Gemini and the media busting out a lot of information, sometimes it's hard to be critical and to know what to follow and what not to follow. So the archetype of discernment, as us as astrologers, we need to bring this in. We need to not be naive. We have taken the apple, and we should be able to tell the difference between good and evil. That's what happened when they ate the apple. They knew the difference between good and evil. And of course, if we're talking about Christianity, I need to bring the two other myths that join heaven and earth. One is the myth of Jesus Christ, and he's, of course, he's like a mercurial figure in a way, because he has a dual nature. He's a man, but he's the son of God. So he's a man, but he's God. And in the cross, I mean, in this picture, you could see the idea that he's joining heaven and earth. And he also felt despair. In the cross, he who was like the master of hope and love, he felt despair, and he felt grief, and he felt that he was being abandoned. And I think this may be something that we might be feeling, or some of us might be feeling. And I think that it might be important to honor that feeling too, the feeling of being despair, of being abandoned. And the message of Jesus was a message of love. So I think that's also important for us as astrologers. Perhaps something of our role in the world, as in joining heaven and earth, has to do with our capacity for love, our capacity for being compassionate for others. And I'm sure it might have happened to you when you're doing a chart. It did happen to me more than once when I'm doing a consultation, that the client is telling me a story that sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes it feels unfair, and there's not much that I can say to make it fair or to make it better. And perhaps the only thing the client needs at that moment is to share this feeling, and for us to be able to hold that space for them. And the other image, the other myth that we have about in Christianity, bridging heaven and earth, is the Virgin. Of course, she's linking two worlds. I mean, she's a virgin, but she's a mother. And I like this image very, very much, because we usually see the pictures of the Virgin all heavenly and celestial, and she gave birth. I mean, I'm not a woman and I don't have children, but I'm sure it's quite tough. And so she's a celestial being, but she's a very grounded being. She's from this earth. And what the Virgin does is that, I mean, God presents to her, asks her if she wants to have this baby, and she says, yes, let it be your will. So I think this myth is talking about surrender. And I think as astrologers, we might have to learn or to discover how we can surrender to our times. Sometimes we want to do something, we want to try, we want to know what we have to do. And perhaps what we need to do is to surrender to this time that's happening right now. And this brings me to the last philosophical school that I want to bring in, the Zeno of Citium, and he's the founder of the Stoics. And the Stoics, well, we know about the Stoics. I mean, we usually use the image of the Stoics like saying somebody who can stand anything, you know. And they believed there was a divine plan. They believed that everything happened for a reason. So they would teach you that you should stand all the trials you face in life because there's a point. You're getting somewhere. So everything happens for a reason. You're going to get somewhere after all of these tribulations. And this brings us to the idea of teleology. And I think this is super important because this is really, really embedded in our practice today. Most of us, I don't know if most of us, but I've seen it in Facebook and Instagram and in other talks also. We believe everything has a purpose, right? So there's this idea that there's a kind of evolution. So if this is happening, it's because we're getting somewhere. And I understand that this may be defense, that this is maybe a way of coping with the situation. But I also think it's a little bit risky sometimes. So if you have done some therapy or some kind of work on yourself and your shadow and your deeper emotions and stuff, you probably had to face difficult times and I would say dark times. And perhaps after going through that, after going through grieving, after going through a period of depression, perhaps you found a purpose in everything that had happened to you, and you found meaning in everything that had happened to you. But I feel right now people are saying this like it's like a mantra. Everything has a purpose. Everything happens for the best. All is good in the end. In order to cope with the situation, and if you do that, if you do it as a protective shield, it's like a spiritual bypass. You're not really going deep into the situation. And in order to gain something, let's say it, I'm sure if the word gain, I like it very much here, but in order to gain something in a process of grief, for instance, you need to grieve. And if you're thinking that everything has a purpose, so you're not grieving properly, I don't know how to say this, you will not get to the purpose. You need to go deep. You need to go through the dark night of the soul. And perhaps this is something we need to do. And that's why I brought the idea of surrendering. And that's why I brought the image of Jesus before that. We need to go through a dark night before we can resurrect and find a purpose. And we can do this as human beings. So I'm Argentinian, and this is a play that it was played in Argentina by Rafael Sprechelburg. He's a genius, and he wrote this play. It's like a 3-hour-long play, and it's amazing. I mean, when it ends, you don't want it to end, really. So it's only 3 hours, and he had a brilliant idea, a beautiful idea. He said that the aliens allowed the humankind to thrive on Earth because we have imagination. And what he said is that imagination is what holds the universe together. So the aliens in this play, it's a fictional play, of course, not a documentary. The aliens, they were worried that we're not dreaming enough anymore, so the cosmos will collapse. And I think this is super important for us as astrologers, not to try to be scientific, but to bring our imagination, to bring our dreams on. We do different kinds of astrology, and somehow they all seem to work. So how could this be? It's because we're bringing meaning to the situation. We're bringing a purpose. We're connecting with something else, something extra. I don't know if you've read the work of Jeffrey Cornelius, who says that astrology is divination. It's connecting with something else, and that's what we can bring to this world. To say that astrology is divination means that we can talk with the gods. We need to perhaps open up our minds a little bit more and talk to the gods. We need to call the great god Pan to ask him to come back to us, to come back to life. Nicholas Campion, in his book, he talks about Babylonia in one of his books, A History of Western Astrology. He talks about Babylonian astrology. So if we go further, we said that I was talking about the philosophical systems that hold astrology together, that are coming from the Hellenistic world. But if we go further back and we go to Babylonian astrology, the idea of fate was not the same way we have it today. And there was not such a difference between the divine and nature. the divinity was everywhere. Everything was divine, and there was not even a difference between heaven and earth. I mean, it was not just looking at the sky that would give you a message. Anything could give you a message. If you were in the countryside and the wind started blowing, that was a message. If you were looking at the moon and there were clouds on top of the moon, that was a message. So everything was a message. So you could talk to the gods constantly. And what Nicholas Campion says is that if the deities could influence humankind, then we could influence the gods, we could influence divinity. And that's why we have rituals. Now, in our society, we have lost a lot of rituals. But the idea of doing rituals was to move the gods so that they would help us. But in order to do that, we need to accept, I believe, this is my thought on this, and this is not definite, of course, but I think we need to accept our situation, our position, and our moment in right now. It's a moment of grief because we might be losing our way of life, and we might be scared, and we might some people are losing their jobs, and some people are losing family members. So if we want to speak to the gods, we need to embrace what we're feeling now, what we are right now, in order to address them. We cannot go and talk to the gods already knowing what they're going to tell us, already hoping, already expecting that they're going to say, don't worry, everything happens for a reason. We need to accept this grief and go with our grief and ask them to help us. So there's this video, I don't know if you have seen it, by the Darlene Gunsburg has made a video. It's on YouTube. If you look the Wessex astrologer, you're going to see it about grief and how important grief is in this moment right now. And I really recommend for you to see it because I think it's very, very inspiring. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she said there are different stages, and I'm sure we've all gone through these stages. I mean, you don't have to go, there's not like a pattern, like you don't have to go all in the same order, and sometimes you will not go to all of them, and you may go to one and then come back. But there is this idea, some of us will deny that we're grieving, some of us will be angry because we're grieving, some of us will try to make a bargain. So we're going to say, okay, maybe if I'm really good at this with my neighbors, then the gods will be moved and they will give me back what I want. Some of us will be depressed, and some of us will accept it. In the end, we will accept this is a time of grief. This is a time to grieve what we are losing. And I think this is the place of acceptance of our grief, which of course we cannot force it, but this is where we can approach our gods and move them to help us. And this is the last myth I'm going to bring in. This is Tolkien. So he, in the world of Tolkien, there's the land of the elves and the men, and then there's the other land where the gods live, and only the elves are allowed to go to the land of the gods. But what happens is that the land of the elves and of men is so corrupted that everything is about to collapse. So there's this character Earendil, who is very special because he's not an elf and he's not a man. He's a half elf because his father is a man, but his mother is an elf, an elven woman. I don't know how to say it. So he's a half elf, and he takes responsibility for this, and he sails to the west, and he breaks the prohibition that only elves could go there to go to talk to the gods, and he asks for forgiveness. He asks help. He asks for help in their needs, and his prayer is granted. And I think this is the time that we're dealing now. We must go back to the great God Pan and ask him to forgive us for having allowed him to die, and to help us in this time of need. And this brings in the question of science and astrology that I was talking about. I think it's time for us to stop trying to be scientific and to accept perhaps a different approach to what astrology can do, a different idea. We are not the science. We're not doctors. We might not. I mean, some of you may be doctors, but maybe our role is not to say everyone how to protect from COVID-19, but our role is to be able to help our clients to talk to their gods according to their chart, to start this dialogue, to see how they can move the gods to help them in navigating these times. And Levi Brule, he talked of the law of participation, and he said that the law of participation means that when you see an object, it may happen to you when you are looking at a movie, when you are perhaps in a museum looking at a photograph or a picture or a painting that really moves you, when you're listening to a music that moves you a lot, maybe on a concert, that you become part of what you're watching. So the law of participation, you participate with with the object that you are experiencing. And I think many of us do this when we do astrology. We're participating with the cosmos. We're participating with this Mars over here, with this Saturn over here. So this law is breaking up the logical way of thinking that something is over there and I'm over here. And if we are distant apart, nothing is happening. Because in astrology, we believe in correspondences. And the idea of correspondences is the idea of participation. So Mars rules butchers, and he also rules, I don't know, iron. So I think it's time for us to remember this law, that we are bringing the idea of participating with the cosmos, and we are bringing in all these characters, all these myths that are moving between worlds, that are helping us in this position, this ambiguous position of participating with the universe and with the cosmos. Now, this is the chart when the COVID-19 was named. So this is complicated. You know, it's very hard to get the timing for these kinds of events. So what I did is to go to the webpage of the World Health Organization, and I mean, you get the news and you get the dates, but you don't get the time where they do things. So what it occurred to me is to go to Twitter, and this is, again, this chart is not definite. Maybe some of you has someone has a more accurate time, but I went to Twitter and I saw the timing. If you have it over here on the right, at the bottom, it says 4:09 p.m. So this is when COVID-19 was named, and there are many things that call my attention. I'm using here equal house. No, this is the topocentric one. I'm using here topocentric houses, but then I have here the equal houses, because I think I usually use equal houses, but I know many of you will use topocentric, so that's why I wanted to use both. And here, what do we have? Well, we have again Neptune, the idea of surrendering in the 9th house. So the idea of our purpose, our meaning, this idea of let's be super hopeful, everything happens for the best, surrendering to something else, something that we might not be able to see right now. And it's interesting to me that we have the Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, all of them in the 6th house, which traditionally is the house of disease, not the house of health, but the house of disease. And then it's interesting again to me that, of course, the ruler is the chart ruler. The ascendant is in Leo, and the chart ruler is the Sun. It's in Aquarius because this was in February, so it's involving the whole community. Everyone is involved, and it's right in the cusp of the 8th house, which is a critical house, the house of death, or let's say a house of crisis and transformation. And what strikes me the most is that if you see Uranus there in the 10th house, a very visible house, he's exactly squaring the ascendant. So I think this means that the whole Uranus in Taurus, the whole transformation that Uranus in Taurus is bringing into, the idea that our sense of security is being challenged and is being transformed, and our relationship with nature, perhaps, it's being transformed, is emerging, is coming up as this COVID-19. I think this COVID-19 is a real manifestation, not the real, but one specific manifestation of Uranus, of the process that Uranus in Taurus implies. And here we have it with equal houses. And I think it's interesting again, because the planets, the Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, did not move. They stay there. So it's like, yeah, we're talking about a disease. And then the Sun, this time it's in the 7th house. So again, it speaks about the idea of contact and how we relate to each other. And Neptune here, it's in the 8th house. So again, the idea of spirituality and surrendering, having to go through a deep transformation. And I forgot on this one, the previous one, that I like also the Chiron in the 9th, perhaps implying that there is a wound in our spirituality, in our sense of purpose, and meaning. So I think as astrologers, we do have one tool. So, I mean, during the talk, I have been more than saying what the role should be. I have been asking questions, right? Maybe we identify with Hermes, maybe we identify with Persephone, with Christ, maybe with the Stoics, maybe with Aristotle, a more rational and logical way of approaching astrology, maybe with Pluto and the idea that we can become better. But there's one thing that all astrologers, no matter what philosophical context you're coming from, we have, and it's the understanding of the nature of time. Because most people believe time it's a line that goes always forward, but we know there are cycles. We know that time moves in circles, and that means that we know that there has been other conjunctions that were important, that were critical, that were scary, and we can see what happened in the past with these conjunctions and perhaps relate to what's happening now, and perhaps from there bring some kind of meaning. And we can also know that this is a dark night. I mean, this is when you have the conjunctions of the planets. I always like to think about like the conjunction of the sun and the moon. So when you have the new moon, you have the night with no moon. So it's a dark night, and this is what's happening right now. It's a dark night. We still don't know what's going on because it's dark. We cannot really see it, but we can embrace this uncertainty. Perhaps that's what we need to do. We can embrace this uncertainty because we know that we will see it in the end. The moon does grow in the sky, and these planets will also follow, and these cycles will also continue to move, and we will start seeing what's happening. But then we also know that this is the time that we plant the seed for the process to come. So I think it's very important for us to ask ourselves, what kind of seed do we want to plant? And if it's a seed that accepts and embraces all of that we are and all of that we're feeling, or if it's a seed that out of fear is just repeating new age mantras for something. And to finish, I wanted to bring up this quote. This is from a novel, Cloud Atlas, which I really like this book. I would say it's not fantastic, but I really liked it. You also have the movie. And this character says, his character is asking, what wouldn't I give now to be able to measure what's constantly changing? And he says, an atlas of clouds. And I think as astrologers, we have this. We have a way of measuring what's constantly changing. So we have these tools. What we need to do is learn how to approach the gods that are represented there. So basically, these are my ideas, and I'm hoping that maybe you got some reflections and some thoughts that you want to share. And if you don't have them now and you want to, I'm willing to keep on this conversation on email or Facebook or whatever. And because this is something that I ask myself a lot, and this is something that I'm discussing a lot with many colleagues. So if you, I don't know if we have any questions or something to share. I wanted to leave this kind of 20 minutes to see if we had something to discuss.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was quite a beautiful and thorough presentation. Thank you. So far there are only 2 questions, but it might be people normally start asking as we go on. So the first question is, what software do you use?
Okay. So I use Janus. We were just talking about that before starting I use Janus, yes. The problem is I have a Mac, so it's only available for Windows, so I have to run it on Parallels.
Okay. Great. Do you mind spelling that for us in case anyone is interested?
J as in Jack, A as in Apple, N as in November, U as in uniform, S as in Sally.
Great. Thank you. The next question, I don't know at what point they asked this, but they said which text. So I'm sure that people maybe are curious about some of the resources that you pulled from. I think you you did a pretty good job at quoting and giving them the giving them the information, but someone, I don't know, the question just says which text. So I believe it was at 1:38, so it was when we were halfway through. I'm sorry, maybe they'll follow up for me there.
Maybe Levi Brule text. I think it's called no, halfway through it must have been maybe here when I was talking about the historical text that I read.
Yes, I think that's
about
right.
What's the text? Oh, I really don't remember. I don't remember. I'm sorry. I read many different. I went on the web and I looked for many PDF files by scholars, and I went crazy trying to find a time. I mean, you could look on your web, on your software, when is the conjunction, but you see it's not exactly exact when maybe they didn't have the exact measures we can have now. But I remember I read this text, so I made a note on my notebook that they calculated for 1 p.m. in Paris. But I'm sorry, I don't know. It's true. I don't have the source for this.
That's okay. At least you're honest about it. So that's what matters. So the next question is, what were the sun and moon glyphs in each chart?
Okay, here, for instance.
The new moon
those are the
conjunctions.
Sorry?
It says, what were the sun and moon glyphs in each chart, the new moon conjunctions?
Okay, yeah, for instance here, but in the 6th house we have moon and sun. And also if you see the 11th house, we have ascendant midheaven. So this is the midpoints. So because I use midpoints a lot when I do consultations, so I have it by default in my software to show the sun and moon midpoints and the ascendant and midheaven midpoint. So if the person that is asking maybe doesn't know about midpoints, the idea of a midpoint is that a point is a point in the chart that it's exactly in between the two and any pair of planets that you can choose. So the ascendant and the moon are usually quite important. So if you measure the distance and you divide it by 2, the midpoint is going to be there. But then you have to do, well, it's just a short midpoint lesson, let's say. And then you have to whatever degree that's in, that I don't know right now in the software, I usually click and I know exactly the degree. You have to take into account the opposition, the square, and the semi-squares, yes. So you have to take into account every 45 degrees, the same midpoint is repeated. So even though you don't have any planets there, if you have a transit over any of that points, it might be important. Is it? I don't know. Was it clear?
That was helpful. Yes, thank you. Okay, and we appreciate you going into detail about how to how to get the midpoint as well. So the next question, what do you think about Pluto's effects long term?
Pluto, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I believe, well, I'm not okay, so I want to bring a message of hope, but my message of hope comes up by accepting that this is a dark time, that only if we accept that, we might find a hope, purpose, and meaning. So with Pluto in Capricorn, of course, we have seen it transforming, questioning, and kind of shaking our social structures. And I think we have been going through, when in 2008, I don't think it was only an economical crisis, but also a political crisis. Yeah, and now that Saturn and Pluto were together, my belief is that because they're both related to something that's, I mean, before we had Pluto, Saturn kind of had the job of Pluto. You know, Saturn was the lord of death before we had Pluto, and I believe they are both talking about what's deep inside. So I think the conjunction's talking about what we are made of. you know, Saturn is the bones and Pluto is something hidden inside. So this is what we're made of. And I think this moment is testing our resilient nature. And I believe we won't see all of the consequences that this moment may have up until Pluto enters Aquarius, which is, I think, in 2003. So I think we still need to wait what we're going to rebuild from everything that's now being questioned and changed and transformed and challenged. And being in quarantine may be a way of may allow a lot of people to see inside and to see what they're made of and to see a lot of things about themselves that they wouldn't see when they were busy working on doing or going through life. Now we're locked up. So if you're living alone, you're faced to yourself. If you're living with your partner, then you're faced to your partner. There are a lot of couples that were working because they were so busy that they didn't really have time to be together. So now they are together. They need to find out how to hold that. And then also with the family. So it's changing a lot our daily life, our structures, how we used to be. And I think that when it goes into Aquarius, we will see exactly how everything has changed.
That's a beautiful way of describing it. Thank you. The next question is, this is another, you know, going along your own philosophies. What is the relationship between free will and fate in your own understanding of astrology, and how do you explain it to, let's see, how do you explain it to other people? I guess, I don't know if they mean, I'm guessing they mean clients, but also maybe people who are confused about astrology and how it, you know, how it is relevant in that way.
Yes, of course. Well, I would encourage the person who asked to, I would share my view, of course, but I would encourage this person to look at his or her chart to see where Jupiter is, what Pluto is, and where Saturn is. And to see if by these 3 planets, this person can get his or her own sense of fate. And to see, maybe, I think these are the 3 planets that kind of describe what people tend to believe in. There's a text by Liz Green, but I don't remember right now the name of the text, that I think she brings in the charts of the astrologers, of different astrologers, and she sees how in the chart their perspective on fate and astrology is represented. So what I first would suggest is that each one of us we don't have to, but it might be good if we embrace and accept that that proposition, that idea that it's seated in our chart. So we may not all agree. In my case, this is the question that I ask myself a lot, actually, and that I'm constantly changing the answer. And I don't know, maybe that's why I constellate clients, that they usually ask me about this during the consultation. They usually ask me, but was I fated to have this situation? Actually, the later consultations I had, they didn't ask, but like 2 or 3 months ago, perhaps, up until 2 or 3 months ago, it was a very constant question. So I had to think about this a lot because they would ask me. Of course, in a consultation, I would never tell them what I think fate is, but I would kind of approach it as I said before, like trying to see to show them what their idea of fate might be. I really agree with Geoffrey Cornelius that astrology is divination. So we do have a chart, and that's in a way our fate, but we are allowed to speak to the gods and to negotiate our fate. So I don't think everything is given from our birth. There's something we can do from this chart.
Wonderful. I love that that explanation of the subjectivity of the philosophies involving fate and free will. I think there's, you know, it's all based on what the individual believes, and I think it's a beautiful way to approach it instead of believing, oh, I have the answer. I think that's a great way to approach it. So thank you.
And
The next question. Oh, sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
may I add something else? Yes, because
Yes.
with the whole idea of divination, and when I was talking here, the law of participation, is that each one is, what is it here? Each one is participating in, I mean, when you are born in a place and a time, and this creates, this means that this is your connection to the universe. So this is your kind of seal or agreement with the universe of what the quality of your life might be, not the quality, but something about what your life might be or who you might be. And I think it's very important to embrace this, that the universe is expressing itself. It's I may be very influenced because I have done some shamanic work, so I may be very influenced by the shamanic cosmovision, but it's like the universe is having the experience of being you, of being this chart. I mean, of being this chart through you. Like a rock is having the experience of being this rock, and a plant is having the experience of being a plant. It's like it's a spirit having the experience of being a plant. So this is the same thing for the chart. The universe is having the experience of being this chart, and right now the universe is having the experience of being this moment, of being this COVID-19 and being the lockdown and everything else. So I feel it's important to embrace that. And in order to do that, we need to accept that we're not going to have all the same perspectives, the same experiences, the same ideas, the same feelings. And I know it's hard work. It's hard work on your own. I mean, on yourself to realize what you are and what you need to become to be unique. And it's also very hard work on the consultation, because clients very often will ask you to solve their conflicts for them. They may not want to take responsibility. Will push you the responsibility. They will push the responsibility to you, so you can sort it out for them. And I think it's very important to embrace that you're not them. You don't have this chart. You don't know what it's like to live with this chart. So we can guide them. Of course, we are like Hermes. We can go to the underworld with them. We can bring in all these ideas, but we can only guide them. They are the ones that are moving through life with this chart. So I think it's very important to respect that. And I understand that this may have been this. I may have got this idea from when I did the spiritual retreats with the shamans and everything, because they were, at least the ones that I've been working with, they were very, very respectful of whatever visions you had, whatever pictures you got, whatever message you got. They were very respectful. This is your message, so we cannot tell you what it means. You need to work with your whatever you believe in, your guiding master or your spirits or whatever you believe in order to understand what this means to you. They can guide you, but they cannot give you the answer. And I think it's an interesting approach for consultations.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like the shamanic influence, and I think that is important. There's this thing I heard once that where they said in the shamanic cultures, the indigenous cultures, nothing is made up. Like in the West, we have this tendency to say, oh, well, the spirit is actually psychologically connected to me in this way, and it's kind of an illusion. But in the shamanic tradition, it's like, no, we honor every single thing that comes as real and valid for that individual person. So beautifully
Right.
put in that way. Let's see. And you there's somebody who asked about a shift in themes in your consultation since the Corona crisis, and you briefly touched on that, and I think that you answered that question anyway. So the next one I want to read is, do you have a theory of storytelling to make the chart more meaningful? I guess maybe from what I'm interpreting of the question, it's like, you know, because you bring in a lot of mythology, and you have the Kabbalah part of it, and then the shaman part. And do you kind of create your own theory of storytelling to make the chart more meaningful, or, you know, how do you? People are curious of how you approach that.
Well, I'm going to talk a lot about that in Norwalk, but because I think that every chart, when you get a chart, every you cannot do the same approach. There's not like a law, like like something that you can always do the same way and it's going to work. But I do think, I don't know if this is answering the question. I do think that we need to look at, I pay a lot of attention at the Mercury. We were talking about Hermes before, and I pay a lot of attention at the Mercury of the person that's coming to the consultation. And because this is the way they will understand, this is the way their mind thinks. And so if it's a Mercury in a water sign, I may bring in stories and all of that. And sometimes, not very often actually, once or twice, I used images. I mean, I had them prepared because I thought when I was preparing the consultation, there was, what was it? I think it was a Saturn Chiron or something aspect, or Chiron Saturn Sun, I don't know. There was an aspect that it was hard for me to put in words, and so I looked for an image, and it was an image by William Blake. And you know, there are many painters that will give you images that can help you during the consultation. So I prepared it. So when she was during the consultation and we were starting talking about this theme, I showed her the image to ask her what she felt, and that opened up for her, kind of started explaining how she felt. So it really helped me out. So I think that it's very important, in order to give a meaningful message, to see what the Mercury of the person is like, because that's how they're going to listen to your words. So if the Mercury is in an earth sign, you need to be very, very clear, and you need to be very to the point. You know, you need to be very grounded. If it's in an earth sign, maybe you can become more abstract, and you can bring in some more crazy ideas. So I think it's very important to look at that. And then I think it's very important to see the synastry between you and your client. So you already know, you can already tell what things are going to be hard for you to approach. If there are some aspects that will show you that, okay, this is something that I might be scared to talk about, that I might be too respectful, or this is something that she or he might become defensive if I talk about this. So I think also, if you look at the synastry, and you don't have to be working on it like for hours, like you would do on a synastry for a client and somebody else, but just to look at the synastry, to get a general picture of where to go about it. And then I would say there's no rule. I mean, every time I get a client, I have to do a hypothesis of how am I going to approach things, and sometimes it works, and sometimes I realized during the consultation that my initial idea was not very good, and I need to change at the moment. Yeah. I don't know if it's answering the question.
Yeah. That, I think that it does. I think you know, I think your main point that you continue to introduce is that everything is dependent on the individual's experience, and it sounds like you're saying there's a need to really fine tune the consultation based on how that person can integrate or receive the information. And I think that is a very important skill for astrologers. So I think it definitely answers the question. So thank you.
Great.
So someone is asking, okay, there's a few more questions. Did you focus on the god Pan because of the current pandemic, or do you feel Pan has a special relationship with astrology?
Okay, that's a nice question. Okay. I focused on Pan. I wouldn't say it's because of the pandemic, but in a way it is because you know how these stories are coming up about now that we're or locked up, the animals are happy again, and the dolphins are in Venice. I don't know, and the sky is blue. And I read the other day the ozone, the how do you call it, the ozone hole? I don't know how you call it. It's kind of covering it up. So I mean, I read all these stories about nature coming back to life. And I thought a little bit of that, like, oh, okay, this is the great god Pan, kind of, because I didn't want to bring in Demeter immediately. So I was thinking of another god that has to do with nature. And I was always touched by the story of Pan. When I read this story when I was maybe 14 or 15 years old, and I was always touched by this idea that this great god of nature passed away, and that when Thamus came out and he gave this news, the, the whole the whole nature, everything was crying because of this god that had passed away. And so I wanted to bring it. I wanted to bring it in a way because I liked it and because I felt it's speaking about our relationship with nature, like how we have disconnected with nature. I think it's the death of Pan is like a symbol of us being detached from the life of nature, from from the natural rules. I mean, this is a god that it's wild like nature. You know, we all love to go to the countryside for a picnic or to have a walk in the forest and everything. But then when you go, you get the bees and you get the insects. And if you go in the countryside, you get too much sun and then it's uncomfortable. So it's like we have this image of nature as being paradise. And then when you go out, it's quite wild. And I wanted to bring in this idea, this conflicting approach that we have with nature. I believe that I don't think it really represents an astrologer because he's much wilder than what we do. But I like the idea that he's a god that is related with our body's needs, because I think as astrologers we become very rational sometimes, and I like the idea of summoning a god that kind of makes us remember that we have a body with needs, and that's why I wanted to bring it in. Not so much because I think he represents an astrologer.
Wonderful. I think that's a beautiful point. And gods and goddesses like Pan and like Kali or one of the other, different nature derivatives, I think is an important way to explore what's going on in our natural world. So I want to say thank you again. We had a few more questions that are personal in nature, and I'm wondering if you can put your information back up so people know where to contact you and how to book a personal reading and dig deeper into these topics. I think it was that slide. So you guys, I know you're so excited about this webinar. It was a wonderful presentation, and really, Alejo, you went into great depth and detail, and the imagery is just gorgeous. So, and people are just saying, like, sending you so much gratitude and thank you for the thoughtful presentation. Thank you for, your opinion and your perspective. It's really fresh. So on that note, is there anything else you'd like them to know about? We have here where to find you on your Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, your website, your email. Is there anything else such as upcoming events that people can find you?
Okay, yes, there are maybe 2 or 3 things. There are 2 events coming up. One is Norwalk 2020, when I will be doing a talk about the consultation. So the idea is that many people, they will go into studying astrology and the techniques, but then when they have to start going with clients and they don't know exactly how much to charge, how to approach how to start the consultation, how long the consultation should be, and that kinds of things. So we're going to discuss that. And then in September, I will give in a workshop for the London School of Astrology about sexuality and the chart. And what I would like to say is, if you are speaking Spanish, if you're a Spanish speaker, we are a group of, there's a group of astrologers. We have created a magazine that's called Revista Stellium. So there's the webpage, and it's free. You can download it. And so if you speak Spanish and you're interested into astrology, it would be great to have you reading the magazine. I think it might interest everyone.
Great, thank you so much. We're so excited to have you. I want to thank you again for donating your time today for this free community webinar. And I just want to remind everyone that if you haven't donated yet, we appreciate anything that you can do. I know these times are challenging potentially, so we just appreciate anything. And if you haven't, you can go do so at our Kepler website, or if you make a purchase through Amazon, you can choose Kepler College of Astrological Arts and Sciences as your Smile charity of choice. And this really helps us keep this community programming going. So I want to thank you again, Alejo, and we're very excited to continue to follow you and the different events that you host. And you're getting so many people are just pouring in with gratitude, and this was really a beautiful presentation, so thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a beautiful rest of your weekend and week, and stay safe.
Okay, you too, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you.